This is Kelly Michalko, and today I'm speaking with Mrs. Gertrude Woloshyn at her home in Battleford, and today is July 4th, 1985. And Mrs. Woloshyn, maybe you can tell me what circumstances got you involved with the Medicare issue and the doctors' strike in Saskatchewan and North Battleford in 1962.
Well, I had been politically involved for many years, and I belonged to the party that was introducing Medicare, which was the Ndp, or I can't remember at that time whether we were still CCF, but I had a long involvement, and therefore it was very close to my heart that we bring in Medicare.
Was there any committee or group of people that were involved with Ndp that promoted the Medicare issue in North Battleford at that time?
Well, like with the when you belong to the New Democratic Party, you have national and provincial conventions. You pass resolutions, and if that resolution is passed, then that becomes a platform for the party. We had introduced hospitalization really a very long time before, and now we felt that it was time to step into the Medicare field. The resolutions were passed at convention, and therefore anybody who took any part at all was aware that this was the resolution and this is what we wanted to do.
So what would be sort of the first steps towards implementation in North Battleford? The bill was introduced probably in the House, and what happened after that?
Well, then, of course, there's always a great deal of debate in the House as to what's going to happen. Well, gradually, actually, it didn't seem to me that there was any problem until the doctors decided that they would fight this. And they started, as my husband would say, garnering their forces. If I remember rightly, we put it over for a while, which gave the doctors lots of opportunity to, get into their battle gear and go to, sort of go to war against the idea. Like for me, I could never understand this because I had grown, well, I was young when the 30s were hitting us hard, and many doctors went without pay. They were very dedicated men. They didn't walk off the job. They looked after people, but they didn't get paid, or if they got paid, it was a few dollars a month. So their standard of living really wasn't very high. And then all of a sudden you have this opportunity to get every cent that you earn, whereby they would certainly have a much better standard of living, and they're all up in arms. So many of us came to the conclusion, of course, that it was because of income tax. Because, and this doesn't go for all doctors, but it goes for some, because, we all have, as a rule, personal experiences, whereby if you had to have surgery before Medicare, and you went to the doctor, and he said, well, you have to have Medicare. Now, it'll cost you maybe $250 if I have to give you a receipt, but maybe only $200 if you don't have to have a receipt. Therefore, many people scrape to give that money. Now, is that ever included in his income tax? It's highly improbable that it was.
So it sort of suggested that
they were greedy.
The introduction of Medicare
would make it the
them
same,
accountable for what their expenses were.
It would make them the same as the guy that carries his lunch pail. You get your T4. That's exactly how, and I feel right to this day that had a lot to do with it.
I see. As I suppose the doctors became more adamant against the Medicare bill, talks began about a strike, and maybe you could describe some of the events that took place in North Battleford.
Well, it became quite vicious. Like, you know, they were having their meetings, and of course we were having our meetings, and everybody's keeping track of one another. Some people, particularly 2 or 3 people that I remember, were quite vicious. You know, so that if you if you happen to meet them on the street, they might very well turn and call you, you know, a communist, and the whole, you know, be rather rude to you, which was not really very necessary. But then, of course, the doctors have always had, well, always been looked upon as very special people. They certainly proved that we didn't have to feel that way about them anymore, because, like, if you were a working person and you have this opportunity to have your children cared for and yourselves cared for without being penalized, and then somebody doesn't want you to have it, the very fact that Medicare took off across the whole country indicates that it was you know, it takes a load off people's minds if they're ill. But getting back to, excuse me, getting back to the other, well, the next thing they're garnering forces, of course, and it seemed to me that most storekeepers in town must have certainly not been NDP, decided that they would have to, you know, support the doctors. So I think most store owners really were, well, I don't think most of them are very political, to be perfectly honest, in this town. And therefore, but still the same, they were going to have this closure, one-day closure. So they closed the stores, and my husband and I drove all around town to see who was closed. And we were extremely upset when stores that really were patronized by sort of the working people of North Battleford, one being Province, had closed. Because these people have been earning their living from the people who carry lunch pails and who are working class people. And yet they would take sides with doctors who probably never even entered their store, or if they did, it was just to invite them to go someplace, not really to buy their suit. So we were quite incensed by that, and the stores that we felt were patronized by us, we sort of told them, well, you know, you closed your doors. Well, really, you know, you closed the doors on us. Who's more important to your business? And we didn't do very much shopping in North Battleford for 6 months after. At election times, I must admit, sometimes it's very difficult for me to see why people don't support the same party as myself.
And the whole idea of the closing of the business was to support the rally in Regina at that time.
Yes, that's right.
Did many people from North Battleford, aside from doctors, go to Regina that you know of?
No, because the ones that would go, really, I had, well, you know, I wasn't socially involved with them or politically, and I really wouldn't know. I think that many of the storekeepers didn't go. I think they just closed their doors for so many hours, like, you know, like we used to have to do on election day. Like the stores all used to close Wednesday afternoons. The elections used to be Wednesday, and the store closed that, or the businesses pretty well closed down that day.
So North Battleford being a relatively small city, would you say most people were aware of the doctor's issue and aware of this conflict? Was there much talk among...
Well, I would say, but there again, like, you know, when you're involved with sort of the issues yourself, you kind of think that everybody's kind of aware of them. But many times I've canvassed or enumerated, and people were unaware of what was going on. So, like, I would think that most people were quite aware of it, for the simple fact that it was an important issue to all of us, really. It meant, that people were going to be able to go to a doctor without being concerned that they had the $8 or the $10 to pay the doctor.
Who would have been the key people in North Battleford in support of Medicare that you can recall, aside from yourself?
Well, anybody that was with Ndp, like all the executive of the constituency. Well, like there would, some of the names, like, the thing is that many of our people are, or people that were involved at that time were getting older, but like there would have been the Bogoleys, the Lambs, all the Woloshyns. Let's see. There's Eric Dean, he was involved, like the Strains from just out of town, Willis Clark, Cubbinses, Sharps. I really should say the same as they say at sales, too numerous to mention.
And so, after this doctor's strike, what occurred after that?
Well, after the doctor's strike, of course, then that happened, I think it was, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but July the 1st, 1962?
Yeah, I think it was the beginning of July.
Yeah. At that time, we didn't have community clinics, but because the doctors had striked, and you see, the thing is that one of the clauses that was in the Medicare bill, if I recall rightly, is the fact that you could go to the doctor, and some doctors might charge you, so that you would say, for instance, pay your $10, okay? And he would give you the receipt, and then you went home and you sent the receipt to the Medicare Commission, and they sent you back your money. Or the doctor could send the bill into Medicare, and Medicare would send it back to you, then you would go down to the doctor's office and pay him. Or he could directly bill the Medicare, and the check would come back to him. So there's the three phases of paying, and some doctors, I guess, to uphold their independence or whatever they thought they were doing, you would pay the bill. Now, I think that's pretty well died out, because the thing is that they are going to get their money, and they'll get it more directly if they send the bill in themselves. And so I think a lot of that's died out. But still the same, they were nitpicking about a lot of things, and many of us felt that after this experience, what doctor could we go to in town? Because every doctor followed along that line. Every doctor we had in town. Even the doctors who probably didn't, who we felt anyway, were not entirely against it, they went along with it. So then people like me say, well, who am I going to go to? So the idea of community clinics grew up. And I think the first one opened in Prince Albert, and it's still going. Then there was one in Saskatoon, Regina, bigger, and we decided to open one here. Well, it was tough going. It was the first while it was great because we got one young doctor, Dr. Alan Edelman, and he was a really smart young doctor, and he got things kind of moving. But then we always had the problem we had to get permission from the medical staff at the hospital in order to have hospital privileges, and that wasn't sometimes very easy. I mean, they were didn't want us to do any more than what we were doing. But anyway, we opened this clinic down in the Beaver Hotel. And as long as Al Edelman was there, things went along pretty good. Al is now a specialist down in Toronto, and but he and several young doctors were extremely dedicated to Medicare. I mean, they didn't come from Saskatchewan. These fellows came in from other places in order to help us because they believed in Medicare. And so, as I say, things went pretty well. Then Al was young, and he stayed quite a long time, but he was interested in getting back to school and, getting further education. So we lost him, and the other doctors we got, even as a dedicated person, it was not that easy to go to them. I mean, often it wasn't your choice. Like people like me went. We went in order to keep our clinic going, to show the support, and we really, didn't try to force anybody. But people that were your friends would say, well, when's the last time you had a medical, and the clinic needs your support. And many of our people did that. My husband was one of the, his name was Fred. He did a lot of the hard work of raising money. He always seemed to be able to have that knack of going out and raising money. And Fred traveled, like we took in the whole rural area. And Fred did lots of traveling and collecting, gathering money. And of course, it cost us a lot too.
Speaking of money, was there any government support at all?
No. This was strictly, there was no government money came into it. It was the community that was going to do it, and it was spearheaded by usually NDP executives or NDP, members. But no, there was no government money at all. We didn't get any more help than the guy across the street would get.
And so the clinic was sort of a consequence of discussed with the doctors and their attitude towards the payment and pay scales, that type of thing.
It was a cooperative thing. And then, like, when you sat back and you watched how the doctors, these doctors maligned you, too. Like, calling people, names, reds, everything under the sun. Not that that bothers you so much, but they were so vicious about it that you thought, well, could I trust them? Could I go back and have an appendix operation from them or have a baby? They might strangle it. We were not pleased with the behavior. And so therefore, you felt like you didn't have anybody to go to.
And so while your husband was out getting funds, was he successful? Was there a lot of support?
Oh, yes. The only thing is you get a lot of support, and then, of course, we were, we sent our bills into the Medicare, and they were paid in that. But I think the biggest problem is that if we could have kept somebody like Al Edelman, we'd have been fine. But we didn't have that. And see, our doctors were on salary. And so, consequently, even if they only brought in $1,000 that month, I don't know, I can't remember what their salaries were, but they still had to have their salary, right? So their salary, if we didn't have enough money coming in through Medicare, had to be met by the loans that we had got from individual people.
So, how long did the clinic finally end up lasting in North Battleford?
I meant to look that up, because I am sure I have some of the books downstairs yet, but I've had a busy week. Well, I know that we must have lasted. See, we had Dr. Edelman for quite a long time. I would say probably 6 to 9 months. And we had a Dr. Daly, and we had a Dr. Johnson twice. And then we had, I can't remember this last doctor's name, I've been trying to think of it too. He's in the Saskatoon clinic now. So I didn't want to put it on anything that maybe wouldn't be factual. But I would say it must have been around 2 years anyway. Maybe it was even longer.
And finally it just had to close. Is that correct?
Yeah, we just couldn't, well, you know, you can't keep borrowing money from the same people. And we just didn't get, couldn't seem to get the right kind of doctors that would sort of, you know, make people want to go and be dedicated to them. I think a lot of maybe doctors coming, and you see most of our doctors, like Dr. Daly came from overseas, and really he was a strange man. I know because he stayed with me. See, what would happen is they'd come into town, they really didn't, you know, have any place, so I used to look after them until they became established. Well, Dr. Edelman stayed with me always, and Dr. Daly stayed with me most of the time, and then he moved to Lloydminster, and then Dr. Johnson, he was married, but he came from Scotland, but had practiced out in the outposts in Newfoundland, and everybody just thought he wasn't very clean. Like, he smoked a pipe, and he's always having his finger in the pipe, you know, and so his nails were dirty. And that really puts people off. And then this last fellow was an East Indian doctor, and he very seldom ever said a word, and he stayed with me too, and he just didn't say a word. And finally his wife and family came, but he just is not a talker, and so, you know, everything seemed to go against us. But like in Regina and Saskatoon and PA, the clinics are still going to community clinics.
So it eventually closed down. During this period, did the local doctors that were initially against you, were they kind of happy that this was happening, or was there any kind of sentiment?
Well, I don't know. I would think that they were quite, well, some of them would be quite jubilant. I think by this time, hopefully, there was maybe many of the doctors that were here were thinking that the concept of Medicare was not a bad concept. And I believe I told you the concept before was the fact that that with Medicare, the reason why we introduced it was that all these people who are sick are the least able to look after themselves or their families. Therefore, if you had Medicare, at least that was taken off them. Like, as a socialist, you sort of believe that there are things that people should have in this life, and Medicare was one of them, that you shouldn't penalize the sick, because many people, and even today in the States, you know, they might retire, and maybe by the time they sell their house and things like that, maybe have $100,000, they can get cancer, and before that person is gone, they got nothing. And at least here, people weren't being penalized. You might not be getting a paycheck if you were the head of the house, but you weren't having to worry that doctor bills were piling up on you. And like, you know, I can never understand how anybody can't think that that's a good thing, is to take burdens like that off people.
So after the period that the clinic was in operation, maybe some of the doctors were swayed towards the idea of Medicare?
Yeah, I would think so. Now, you know, I think even now a lot of them would fight against it, you know, because we're supposed to be on opposite sides of the fence type of thing. But the very fact that you have doctors working in the university hospitals who are paid by the government, I mean, they're on salary. Like, my belief, of course, is that they should all be on salary. The same as teachers. I mean, you know, the teacher is also very, very important in this society. We've had education, maybe not as free as what it should be, but basically, you know, it's being free. Why wouldn't you, you know, have the same thing? And there's no reason why a doctor couldn't be paid on salary. But that they would fight like hell. I know they would. But the ones that are working in the universities are. And the thing is, the very fact that we've had a big influx of doctors, because, you know, when you look around North Battleford, you know, there's a lot of doctors. Don't you think it isn't because they're going to get a regular, you know, if they look at your toe, they're going to get paid for looking at your toe? I think so.
So the possibility of getting a community clinic in North Battleford seems to be unlikely.
No, no, it's nothing that we would worry about now. Like I feel, and I'm sure the NDP feel, that basically Medicare has turned out well. It is working well. Hospitalization is working or has been working well. But I've been reading that so many grants are being cut that it's you know, that services are being cut too. Like there was a letter in the Star last night about, you know, services being cut. Like the government has granted money to build buildings, but they haven't been granting money for bed care. And, you know, every time there's cuts like that, well, the people in the hospitals or the institutions suffer. But, like, that's just a matter of dollars and cents. You know, you can build that up again. But, like, in health care, well, I would be going more for, well, maybe helping more with teeth and eye care. You know, the things that often you have to get for your children, your glasses. Well, you know, glasses to buy even for a youngster, well over $100, which is quite a, you know, a burden. And really, their eyes should be checked probably every 6 months to a year. And that's kind of a burden, too, for many people.
I wonder if you could go back a bit to when the strike did occur. Your own personal incident at the hospital, it kind of gives an indication of the kind of feelings were running high at the time.
Yes.
In the home.
I can give you two instances. I had not been feeling well for quite a while, and I felt that there was something wrong with me, but I had gone to a doctor probably in about April, and he had taken a pregnancy test and said I wasn't pregnant. But anyway, I'm going along, and somehow or other I'm getting a tumor in my stomach. At least I'm beginning to think it must be a tumor. If I'm not pregnant, how come, you know, I've got this big belly? So by this time I'm getting so I can't wear clothes, and it's coming summertime, and so I went down to Grobman's and to buy a dress, and I'm not feeling good. Two of the clerks there, who I knew quite well, said, well, Gertie, what's wrong? And I said, well, I don't know. I'm not feeling well. They said, well, why don't you go to the doctor? And I said, right now I'm so mad at those damn doctors that I can't go to a doctor. I'll wait till after this is over. Because by this time I knew the strike was coming up. I'll wait till it's over, but I just cannot go to a doctor now. Well, that's all I had to say. Well, in very vulgar terms, which I won't use, I was quite surprised, because they both laid into me that why should these poor doctors be dictated to by us? I said, well, look, you two women are working here. You're getting minimum wage. You got the minimum wage because people forced the governments to make those acts. Otherwise, you'd be getting peanuts. And I said, and who the hell tells you how long you can take for coffee? I said, your boss does. I said, these doctors are working for us. You know, they're looking after us. Who are they? Hell, they didn't pay for their education. They pay a part of it. But to build those hospitals and those clinics, and even today, I mean, what doctor has to have much in his office except an examination room? He goes to the hospital, right? For his blood tests, his x-rays, the whole bit. So I stormed out of there. I didn't buy a dress that day. Anyway, those two women didn't talk to me for quite a long time. But now they're all right. They talked to me, mainly because they went to work at the co-op store. And I'm, of course, a member of the co-op. Well, anyway, on, I guess it was June the 29th, it was late in the evening, and I had been up at the drive-in, and we hadn't gone to the show, but Garrett and Doris and I, Holt, were relatives of ours, and we used to often go up there for coffee. Okay? Well, anyway, we'd gone up there for coffee, and when I was up there, we did this quite often, and those days the drive-in was busy, so I would go behind the counter and pour Cokes ahead and things like that. And I got this terrible pain in my side, and I said to Doris, I said, gosh, I've got a terrible pain in my side. She laughed, and she said, wouldn't it be funny if you were pregnant? And I said, ha ha, yeah, it sure would. And so I said to Fred, we better go home because I'm just not feeling very good. So we go home, and by the time I get home, I am ill. But anyway, I go to bed, and I'm up and I'm down, and I said to Fred, my God, this is worse than having a baby. And it snapped that probably that's what was wrong. So he carries me into the hospital, and this is about 4 in the morning, and what had happened was I was aborting a deceased fetus. So the next morning I wake up in the hospital, and Dr. Garner comes around to see me, and he asks me how I'm feeling, etc., etc. Then he says to me, I won't be in to see you tomorrow, Gertrude. And I said, and how come? He said, well, you know, we go on strike. And I said, well, isn't that nice? I said, you would let me lay here, and because of a damn strike that you probably don't even agree with, do this. And he says, well, Gertrude, you're just too much of an idealist. So I said, fine. So the next day, I had a really bad time that day. Well, I shouldn't say I had a bad time that day, but on July the 1st, it wasn't any picnic because there was no doctors around. And this nurse comes in, and I said to her, is there doctors around? Is there a doctor in the hospital? She said, no, there isn't. I said, oh, what happens if something goes wrong? She said, well, I know who to, certainly there's somebody around. I know who to get. And I said, well, why the hell did you lie to me? What do you think I am, some kind of a imbecile that doesn't know things? So right there and then we had a big battle. And I found that, you know, they were so all doctor that they didn't have time to change your bed unless you asked for it. They were having a real picnic. And so I said to her, well, who's going to discharge me? She said, the nurses will discharge you, which they did. And I said, what happens if something goes wrong? Because, you know, this little pregnancy had lasted 5 to 6 months. And she said, oh, there'll be nothing go wrong, and that's it. And so that's what happened. So I wasn't very happy with the attitude of the nurses at that time either. But anyway, those were the 2 incidents that happened, and they were really quite personal. But it just seemed that the hospital kind of, well, I shouldn't say the hospital. I should say that most of the nurses felt that the doctors probably were, you know, very justified in going out on their strike. But I would doubt very much whether you would find nurses that think like that today. I think that the nurses have come a long way too, because at that period in time, it seemed that a medical man was sort of put on a pedestal, and the nurses sort of, you know, did exactly what they told them, and the patients did. It was so that if you were a patient sick in the hospital, you really never asked the doctor what was wrong with you. But now people do. I think there was a real awakening for everybody, whether they believed in Medicare or not, that, you know, these people are infallible too, and you know, you have a right, you as a person have a right to know what's wrong with you. And as a nurse, you have a right to question an order that you don't understand or don't believe in.
So one consequence of 1962 in North Battleford might be that a lot of attitudes were certainly changed.
Oh, I believe that, yes. I really believe that.
Prior to the actual strike in 1962, there were several conventions held, and one of them allowed the NDP to present their issue to the doctors. Maybe you can tell me about that one.
Oh, I think actually it wasn't the NDP it was the Ndp Provincial Convention. It was being held in Saskatoon, and the doctors had requested that they be allowed to put their position before the floor of the convention. The delegates to the convention were not in the least sympathetic to the doctors, but they were granted permission to come. So Dr. Dalgleish was to be the speaker. My husband was to be the chairman. So before Dr. Dalgleish came in, he sort of came in with his bodyguards. I think maybe he was a little frightened because the convention was a large one, plus the fact that they're pretty militant people.
Who is Dr. Dalgleish?
Exactly? Dr. Dalgleish was the chairman of the what do they call it? The Medical Association. He at that time was the president of the Medical Association. So anyway, my husband stood up and he had a chat with the delegates, saying that we had voted to let this man speak, and therefore we should treat him with respect and not give him catcalls and hoot him out of the hall. That although we were definitely probably against anything he might say, that he had requested permission and it had been granted, and therefore everybody must act like ladies and gentlemen. And they did. But I'm sure that if they hadn't been reminded, it would have been quite the place, because many, many people, and of course Dr. Dalgleish was pretty rough in any remarks he made too. He was inclined to be quite vicious also. But anyway, the convention went off all right. I mean, it didn't make any difference to the Medicare bill because it was to go through. It was an exciting time, that convention. I was there, and I can remember everybody was working hard, and everybody was hustling and bustling around. Like old friends of mine, Alan Blakeney and Bill Davies. They were both ministers at that time. Woodrow Lloyd, Brocklebank. Everybody had something to do. Everybody was busy because at that time we were also sort of ironing out the last details of the Medicare issue. And I'm sure that we brought this fellow over from London, England, and I can't think of his name now, to help resolve issues. So it was very exciting.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Woloshyn.
You're welcome.